That's not for people like you to touch." The words cut through the exclusive showroom like shattered glass. Heads turned, champagne glasses paused midair, and a suffocating silence settled over the gathering of Silicon Valley's elite. Mason Chen, his calloused hands still outstretched toward the gleaming crimson supercar, froze as the showroom director's voice echoed against marble floors and glass walls. The young mechanic's work uniform, still bearing the manufacturer's logo, seemed suddenly out of place among designer suits and evening gowns. In the corner, partially hidden behind a sculptural pillar, a man in sunglasses lowered his crystal flute, his attention completely captured. The invitation-only unveiling of the Phantom SV12 had transformed the San Francisco dealership into a temple of exclusivity. 3 years of revolutionary engineering had produced what automotive journalists were already calling the decade's most important hypercar. Soft lighting caressed carbon fiber curves as waiters glided through the crowd of tech billionaires, celebrity investors, and industry titans. Mason had slipped in through the service entrance, desperate for a glimpse of the finished product, the vehicle whose revolutionary hydrogen propulsion system he had helped perfect during countless overnight shifts. He hadn't expected to actually touch it, but something in him couldn't resist reaching for his creation. "Sir, I need you to step away from the vehicle." The showroom director's voice grew louder as security personnel materialized from the perimeter. "This event is for serious buyers only." Titters of laughter rippled through the audience as Mason's face burned with humiliation. The director's hand gripped his shoulder, steering him toward the exit. "Perhaps you misunderstood the invitation requirements. The starting price exceeds 7 figures." More laughter. Then a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me." The crowd parted. Robert Downey Jr. removed his sunglasses, eyes locked not on the car, but on the scene unfolding before him. The crowd's murmurs subsided as Robert Downey Jr. made his way through the gathering, his casual confidence commanding attention without demanding it. The actor's presence at exclusive vehicle launches was nothing unusual. His collection of custom cars was almost as famous as his film career, but the intensity in his eyes as he surveyed the scene suggested this was about more than automotive appreciation. "I'm curious," he said, his voice carrying that distinctive timbre that had delivered 1,000 memorable lines. "What exactly is the problem here?" The showroom director straightened his already impeccable tie, switching instantly from enforcer to professional host. "Mr. Downey, absolutely no problem at all, just ensuring our showcase maintains its appropriate atmosphere." He gestured dismissively toward Mason. "This young man isn't part of our event. Seems he wandered in from the service department." Mason swallowed hard, torn between humiliation and indignation. The faces around him blurred into a wall of judgment. Tech moguls who'd made billions from other people's innovations. Collectors who purchased engineering excellence like fashion accessories. They saw his uniform, his worn boots, his hands that bore the evidence of actual work. They didn't see the 3 years he'd spent perfecting the hydrogen intake system that made the Phantom SV12 revolutionary, the countless nights bent over schematics, the failed prototypes, the breakthrough that finally balanced power and efficiency in a way no one had achieved before. "I just wanted to see it finished," Mason said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Just once." Robert's gaze shifted between Mason, the car, and the showroom director, whose practiced smile was beginning to falter under the scrutiny. The wealthy audience watched with interest. Celebrity confrontations weren't on the official program, but they certainly added entertainment value. "The service department, huh?" Robert said, hands sliding into his pockets as he rocked slightly on his heels, a gesture familiar to anyone who'd watched his interviews. "Tell me something. What's your name?" "Mason. Mason Chen." "And what exactly do you do in the service department, Mason Chen?" Before Mason could answer, the director interjected smoothly. "Mr. Downey, if I may, We have the chief engineer here tonight, who would be delighted to answer any technical questions about the Phantom." He gestured toward a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who stepped forward with practiced humility. Dr. Harrington oversaw the entire development process. A ripple of appreciative murmurs moved through the crowd. The silver-haired man nodded graciously, accepting the recognition as his due. Mason's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the floor. The showroom director had his hand firmly on Mason's shoulder now, guiding him inexorably toward the exit. "Actually," Robert said, his tone casual but carrying a steely undertone that stopped the director mid-step, "I'd like to hear from Mason first." He turned to the young mechanic. "You were about to tell us what you do?" The spotlight of attention swung back, and Mason felt the weight of every gaze in the room. "I'm a propulsion engineer," Mason said, his voice stronger now, despite the director's hand still attempting to steer him away. "I was part of the developmental team for the hydrogen propulsion system." He gestured toward the gleaming hypercar, the intake manifold, the compression cycle, the thermal exchange system. "I worked on those elements for 3 years?" Dr. Harrington's polished smile flickered for just a moment. Several guests exchanged glances, the atmosphere shifting subtly. Robert Downey Jr. nodded slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. 3 years, Robert repeated, making it sound like both a question and an observation. "That's quite an investment, and tonight's the big reveal, the culmination of all that work. Seems reasonable you'd want to be here." He turned to the showroom director. "Wouldn't you agree?" The director's smile had transformed into something more like a grimace. "Of course, but these events have certain protocols." "Protocols," Robert echoed, stretching the word out as if examining it. "I've never been great with those." The easy charm in his voice carried an undertone that everyone in the room recognized from his most iconic roles, the moment when Tony Stark decided he wouldn't be playing by someone else's rules. He turned back to Mason. "This propulsion system, it's revolutionary, right? That's what the press releases all say." Mason's eyes lit up despite the tension surrounding him. "It's the first production vehicle to achieve a true zero-emission hydrogen cycle with supercar performance. The thermal efficiency rating alone is—" "Perhaps we could continue this more technical discussion privately," the director interrupted, desperation creeping into his professional tone. "Many of our guests would prefer to focus on the aesthetic and lifestyle elements of the Phantom experience." Robert's eyebrow arched. Would they? Let's ask them. Robert Downey Jr. turned to address the gathering, his casual stance belying the purpose in his eyes. "How many of you came here tonight because this car represents the future of automotive engineering?" Hands rose throughout the room, venture capitalists, tech innovators, environmental philanthropists. "And how many of you are curious about how this machine actually works, not just how it looks in your garage?" Fewer hands this time, but still a significant number. The director's professionally whitened smile had vanished completely. "Here's what I'm thinking," Robert continued, moving closer to the Phantom SV-12, its crimson finish gleaming under the gallery lights. "We have the rare opportunity to hear about this remarkable piece of engineering from someone who actually built it." He gestured toward Mason. "I don't know about all of you, but I find that infinitely more interesting than another sales pitch." A murmur of agreement rippled through some of the crowd. Dr. Harrington shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances with the showroom director. A tech billionaire in the front row nodded enthusiastically. "I'd like to hear the technical details. After all, if I'm considering an 8-figure investment, I should understand what I'm buying." The director recognized he was losing control of his carefully orchestrated event. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a detailed technical presentation scheduled for later this evening, delivered by our authorized product specialists." "Who memorized a script written by the marketing department," Robert interjected, his tone light but pointed. The crowd chuckled, and the balance of power in the room shifted perceptibly. No offense to your specialists, but I'm more interested in hearing from the person who actually solved the problems, who figured out how to make hydrogen power viable in a production supercar. Mason stood straighter now, the initial humiliation fading as he found himself unexpectedly championed by one of Hollywood's biggest stars. The showroom director had backed away slightly, reassessing the situation as several high-net-worth clients nodded their agreement with Downey. "What do you say, Mason?" Robert asked, gesturing toward the vehicle. "Care to give us the real story behind this machine?" The young engineer looked from Robert to the car he'd helped create, then back to the roomful of elite potential buyers whose collective net worth probably exceeded the GDP of a small nation. For a moment, he hesitated, feeling the weight of class boundaries and corporate hierarchies. "The real breakthrough," Mason began, his initial hesitation melting away as he stepped toward the car, "wasn't just in making hydrogen work as a fuel source. The challenge was making it work at supercar performance levels." As he spoke, his entire demeanor transformed, his shoulders straightened, his voice found its natural confidence, and his hands, those calloused, worked hands that had so clearly marked him as an outsider moments before, now moved with precision as he gestured toward specific elements of the vehicle. "We had to completely rethink the compression cycle. Traditional methods created too much thermal loss." Mason was now standing beside the Phantom, pointing out features with the authority of someone who had wrestled with every engineering challenge the vehicle had presented. The solution came after 9 months of failures, a multi-stage compression system that captures and reuses thermal energy. The crowd had gravitated closer, many of the tech executives genuinely interested in the innovation before them. Even those who had laughed at Mason's expense earlier were now paying attention. Robert stood to the side, arms crossed, a satisfied smile playing on his lips, as he watched the young engineer command the room with nothing but genuine expertise. Dr. Harrington, the silver-haired chief engineer, had retreated to the periphery, his expression a complex mixture of annoyance and discomfort. The showroom director hovered nearby, unsure whether to intervene. The event had veered dramatically off his meticulously planned script, but the potential buyers seemed engaged. "May I?" Mason asked, gesturing toward the vehicle's hood. After a moment's hesitation, the director gave a tight nod. With reverent precision, Mason released the carbon fiber hood to reveal the Phantom's revolutionary power plant. "This isn't just an engine," he explained, his passion evident. "It's an integrated propulsion ecosystem. Each component communicates with the others in real time, making thousands of adjustments per second." A venture capitalist who had backed several green energy startups leaned forward. "What's the efficiency rating compared to traditional hydrogen fuel cells?" Mason's eyes lit up. "That's where we made the real breakthrough. We achieved 87% efficiency, nearly double the previous production record." Robert watched as Mason's expertise gradually transformed the perception of everyone in the room. As Mason continued his impromptu presentation, the atmosphere in the showroom underwent a palpable shift. The wealthy attendees who had initially seen him as an intruder now clustered around, asking increasingly technical questions. Mason answered each with the depth of knowledge that only comes from intimate involvement with the creation process. The thermal exchange system was actually inspired by marine biology, he explained, pointing to a component nestled within the engine bay. "We modeled it after how certain deep-sea creatures circulate blood to maintain body temperature in extreme environments." Robert Downey Jr. moved through the crowd, observing the transformation with evident satisfaction. He caught fragments of conversations as guests discussed the innovation before them. Revolutionary approach to energy conversion. Could apply similar principles to our server cooling systems. Asking if he'd consider consulting on our aerospace project. The showroom director had retreated to a corner, phone pressed to his ear, as he urgently communicated with someone, likely corporate management, trying to determine how to regain control of the situation. Dr. Harrington stood nearby, his expression growing increasingly sour as Mason fielded questions that would have left the older man floundering. Robert made his way to where Mason was explaining the intelligent power distribution system to a captivated group of tech executives. He waited for a natural pause before speaking. "You know what impresses me most," Robert said, drawing everyone's attention. "Not just the engineering, though that's clearly brilliant. It's the passion. When someone truly loves what they create, it shows in every detail." Mason looked at him with genuine appreciation. "Thank you, Mr. Downey. That's exactly it. This wasn't just a job. For those of us on the development team, this was about pushing boundaries, about proving something was possible." "Call me Robert," he replied with a warm smile, then addressed the gathered crowd. "I think what we're witnessing tonight is more valuable than any choreographed sales presentation. We're seeing the human story behind the machine." The showroom director chose this moment to approach, having apparently received instructions from his superiors. His professional mask was back in place, though strain showed around the edges. "Mr. Downey, Mr. Chen," he said, emphasizing Mason's name with newfound respect. "I've just spoken with our CEO. He extends his personal apologies for the misunderstanding and would like to invite you both to continue this discussion in our private lounge area." Robert's eyes narrowed slightly. "A misunderstanding? Is that what we're calling it?" The showroom director's smile remained fixed, but sweat had begun to bead along his hairline. "Perhaps misunderstanding isn't the right word. A regrettable oversight in recognizing Mr. Chen's contributions to the project." "An oversight," Robert repeated, the two words carrying the weight of a full critique. He turned to Mason. "What do you think? Does oversight cover it?" Mason looked around at the gathered crowd, the wealthy potential buyers, the corporate representatives, the automotive journalists discreetly recording the unfolding drama, and Robert Downey Jr., whose unexpected advocacy had completely reversed his situation. For a moment he considered the diplomatic response, accepting the half-hearted apology, retreating to the private lounge, allowing the company to save face. But something in Robert's expectant gaze encouraged honesty. "No," Mason said, his voice quiet but firm. "It wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate exclusion." He gestured to the space around them. "This event was designed specifically to separate the creators from the consumers, to make sure people like me, the ones who actually built this car, stay invisible while people with money are told they're part of an exclusive club for appreciating what we created." A tense silence fell over the gathering. Several executives shifted uncomfortably. The showroom director's professional expression faltered. "Young man," he began, an edge of warning in his voice, but Robert cut him off. "He's right, though, isn't he?" The actor's typically casual demeanor had given way to something more incisive. This whole event, the champagne, the mood lighting, the artificial scarcity, it's all theater designed to make buying a car feel like joining an elite community. He gestured toward Mason. Meanwhile, the people who actually made the revolutionary machine possible get escorted out the back door if they dare to show their faces. Dr. Harrington stepped forward, apparently feeling the need to defend the corporate structure. "With all due respect, Mr. Downey, product development is a complex process involving hundreds of individuals. We can't possibly recognize every engineer or technician who contributed some small component." Mason's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Robert raised an eyebrow. "Some small component? Should we review what he just spent 20 minutes explaining to all of us? The core innovation that makes this entire vehicle possible?" The confrontation had now drawn the complete attention of everyone in the showroom. Waiters had stopped circulating champagne, journalists had abandoned any pretense of disinterest, and the potential buyers watched with the same intensity they might bring to a high-stakes negotiation. "There's a pattern I've observed in my years in Hollywood," Robert said, his voice carrying naturally through the space without needing to shout. "The further someone is from the actual creative process, the more credit they typically try to claim." He nodded toward Dr. Harrington. "No offense, Doctor, but I'm guessing you haven't personally calibrated a hydrogen compression valve in quite some time." Scattered laughter broke the tension momentarily. Dr. Harrington's face flushed. "I oversee the entire engineering division," he said stiffly. "My role requires a broader perspective than any single component." "A broader perspective," Robert nodded thoughtfully. "That's valuable, but so is the deep, specialized knowledge that solves the actual problems." He turned to Mason. "How many people were on your immediate team working on the propulsion system?" "4 of us," Mason replied, "working directly on the hydrogen cycle innovation." "4 people," Robert repeated, turning back to address the room. "4 people who created the technological breakthrough that everyone here came to see tonight. And not one of them was invited to this event." The showroom director attempted to regain control. "Mr. Downey, I assure you the company values all its employees. Tonight's event is simply focused on the customer experience rather than technical development." "The customer experience," Robert echoed. "Let me ask you something. How many of the people in this room made their fortunes by creating something?" He looked around at the gathered tech moguls and entrepreneurs. "How many of you started by actually building, coding, designing, doing the work before you were managing others who did the work?" Hands rose throughout the room, more than half the attendees. "That's what I thought," Robert continued. "Most wealth comes from creation, from innovation. Yet somehow, we've built a system where we celebrate the buyers over the builders." He gestured toward Mason. "Where someone who actually solves problems gets shown the door while people who just write checks get treated like visionaries." A tech billionaire whose electric vehicle startups had disrupted the automotive industry stepped forward. "He's right," she said, nodding toward Robert. "I built my first prototype in a garage. Now I have 5,000 engineers working for my companies, but I never forget that everything we sell began with people solving problems." She looked at Mason with newfound respect. "People like you." The showroom director was now visibly uncomfortable, caught between corporate protocol and the shifting sentiment of the very clients he was trying to impress. Dr. Harrington had begun a strategic retreat toward the periphery of the gathering. "What's your name again?" the tech billionaire asked Mason directly. "Mason Chen." "Well, Mason Chen, I'd like to hear more about your thermal exchange system. My aerospace division is facing similar challenges." She handed him a business card. "Call my office. We pay problem solvers very well." Robert watched this exchange with a satisfied smile that slowly transformed into something more contemplative. He placed a hand on Mason's shoulder and addressed the room once more. "You know, I've played geniuses in movies, Tony Stark, Sherlock Holmes, characters who create amazing things. But that's just acting. The real innovation, the actual genius, it comes from people like Mason, who solve the impossible problems that move us forward." He gestured around the showroom. "All this glamour, all this exclusivity, it's just packaging. The real value is in the creation." The showroom director, sensing the complete loss of his carefully orchestrated event, made a last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Mr. Downey, Mr. Chen, perhaps we could continue this discussion while allowing other guests to enjoy the showcase as planned." "Actually," the tech billionaire interrupted, "I'm finding this discussion far more valuable than looking at carbon fiber and leather samples." Murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd. Robert's eyes met Mason's, and the young engineer saw something there beyond celebrity advocacy, a genuine respect from one creator to another. because, despite the differences in their fields, both understood what it meant to build something meaningful, to solve problems, to make the impossible work. "So," Robert said, turning back to Mason with genuine interest, "tell us more about how you tackled the compression cycle problem. I'm particularly interested in how you maintained power output while reducing thermal losses." And just like that, the event transformed from a sales showcase to something far more authentic, a celebration of innovation itself. By the time the evening concluded, the showroom had been transformed. The original script, a choreographed sales pitch targeting elite buyers, had been completely abandoned. Instead, Chen found himself surrounded by genuinely interested innovators, entrepreneurs, and even a handful of celebrities who had been drawn by the authentic passion behind the technology. The showroom director had retreated to the periphery, occasionally checking his phone as increasingly urgent messages arrived from corporate headquarters. News of the unscripted drama had already begun circulating through social media, with automotive journalists live tweeting the unexpected turn of events. "Respect the Builder" was trending in tech circles. Robert Downey Jr. had stepped back, content to watch the natural consequences of his intervention unfold. He observed with satisfaction as Mason engaged with potential buyers who now viewed the young engineer not as service staff, but as the brilliant mind behind the technology they sought to purchase. "You've created quite the situation," a voice said beside him. It was the tech billionaire who had first offered Mason her business card. "Marketing won't be happy." Robert shrugged, his eyes still on Mason. "Marketing will adapt. They always do. Tomorrow they'll be spinning this as a demonstration of the company's deep engineering talent." "Probably," she agreed, "though I might have poached their best propulsion engineer by then." Robert laughed. "Fair enough." He nodded toward Mason, who was deep in animated conversation with a group of tech executives. "Look at him now, completely in his element. That's what happens when you let people show what they're actually capable of." Within 24 hours, the incident had gone viral. Clips of Robert Downey Jr. challenging the corporate structure and championing the unknown engineer circulated across platforms, generating millions of views. The narrative resonated far beyond the automotive world. It touched on universal themes of recognition, class barriers, and authentic value. The company's PR team scrambled to control the narrative, issuing a statement celebrating their culture of innovation and announcing a new initiative to highlight the contributions of their engineering teams. Chen was suddenly named lead propulsion engineer in press materials, his previous relative anonymity replaced with corporate recognition. 3 days after the event, Mason sat in a coffee shop, still processing how dramatically his professional life had changed. His phone buzzed constantly with LinkedIn requests, job offers, and media inquiries. The company had offered him a substantial promotion and raise, a transparent attempt to prevent him from accepting the numerous competing opportunities that had materialized. His contemplation was interrupted when someone slid into the seat across from him. Robert Downey Jr., sunglasses pushed up on his head, placed 2 fresh coffees on the table. "Hope you don't mind the intrusion," he said with that familiar half-smile. "Figured you might be dealing with quite the aftermath." Mason shook his head, still somewhat starstruck despite their previous interaction. "It's been overwhelming. I never expected any of this." "No one ever does," Robert replied, pushing one of the coffees toward him. "The question is, what are you going to do with it?" "I've been thinking about that," Mason said, warming his hands around the coffee cup. "I've got offers from just about every major tech and automotive company. The money's incredible." Robert nodded, waiting for him to continue. "But what keeps coming back to me is how it felt to explain our work, the actual innovation, and have people genuinely interested." Mason looked up. "Not just the executives or the marketers, but the people who might actually drive the car or adapt the technology for other purposes." The real connection, Robert said. Exactly. For 3 years, I was just a name on technical documents. Then suddenly, for one night, the work itself mattered more than corporate hierarchy. Mason took a sip of his coffee. I want to build on that, not just take a bigger paycheck to disappear back into another corporate structure. Robert smiled, a genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. You know, that's why I jumped in that night. Not just because of the injustice of the moment, but because I recognized something in you, the same fire that drives any real creator. He leaned forward slightly. Hollywood, Silicon Valley, Detroit, the industries are different, but the pattern is the same. The system wants to separate the creators from the consumers to make the transaction feel more valuable than the creation itself. Mason nodded slowly. So, what's the alternative? Build something that can't be separated from its creator, Robert said simply. Something where the value is so intrinsically linked to the mind behind it that they can't package it without you. As they continued talking, plans emerged, not just for Mason's career, but for a potential foundation that would celebrate and connect innovative problem solvers across industries. The evening that began with humiliation had catalyzed something much larger than either of them had anticipated, a movement to recognize that true mastery lives in those who create, not those who simply consume. Across social media, the video clips continued to spread, resonating with millions who had ever felt their contributions overshadowed by those with more status but less substance. The story had transcended a single moment in a luxury showroom to become a cultural touchpoint, a reminder that beneath the glamour of finished products lie the hands and minds of those who solve the impossible problems.